Well, good evening, everyone. It's 7 o'clock, so let's make a start. Welcome to tonight's meeting of the Finance, Assets and Performance Scrutiny Committee. Item number 1 is apologies for absence. There are some empty chairs. I have received before the meeting apologies from Councillor Dean, for whom no substitute is possible because she's a group of 1. Are there any other apologies for absence? Councillor Grocott.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Apologies for Councillor Lawley and Councillor Laporte, please.
Any substitutions from them?
Afraid not, no.
And are there any further apologies? If not, we'll proceed with the agenda. Item number 2 is declarations of interest. Does any councillor wish to make a declaration of interest? I see no indication. Item 3, minutes of our previous meeting. Are there any questions or comments on the minutes? Can I agree them as accurate? Brilliant. Those are accurate then. And in that case, the first substantive item of business is number 4, the draft revenue and capital budgets and strategies for the forthcoming financial year. I will ask Councillor Sweeney, the portfolio holder, to introduce the item.
Thank you for that, Mr. Chairman. Clear my throat. This report presents the refreshed medium-term financial strategy, including the draft proposals being considered to balance the 26-27 revenue budget and the proposed capital programme for 26-27 to 28-29. It also includes the drafts of the capital strategy, treasury management strategy, investment strategy and commercial strategy. Savings and funding strategies have been identified to address a £1.599 million budget gap for 26-27 via a vigorous efficiency board process. They've been agreed with managers as being both feasible and sustainable, and the first drafts of these have been scrutinised by the Finance Performance Scrutiny Committee. A significantly below inflation council tax rise of 1.99% per Band D property is again proposed. This amounts to 10 pence per week or less for 95% of households within the borough. The savings identified enable a continued contribution of £250,000 to the Borough Growth Fund. This will continue to enable investment in the Council's priorities, including significant investment in boosting the sustainability of the environment within the Borough and supporting development of the town centre. I'm also pleased to confirm again that the savings proposed do not include any redundancies. The capital programme for 26-27 to 28-29 is based on new schemes, which are vital to ensure continued service delivery and assisting the Council to achieve its corporate and service objectives as set out in the Council plan. These schemes total £109.9 million, of which £35.1 million relates to 26-27. This includes schemes to regenerate the town centres, including schemes partially funded from major investment into the borough, successfully secured via the Town Deals Fund for both Newcastle and Kidsgrove. Delivering the capital programme 26-27 will require prudential borrowing to be undertaken. The impact of borrowing is included in the MTFS. The proposals enabled a financially robust budget for the council for 26-27, both ensuring the council's continued financial sustainability and protecting services that our residents value. That's the opening spiel. I could just add one thing. There's a young man at the end of here called Steve Heppel. As Sarah Wilkes left us, there was an internal process and Craig got Sarah's job. I think we were all very, very pleased for Craig for that. And then Steve was interviewed for Craig's job. And Steve got that. And again, congratulations to both of them for that. And I think it's good that Steve comes into these meetings now and starts getting involved in it. That's why he's here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Councillor Sweeney, and welcome. It's surely the best part of your job will be responding to this committee. Okay, the recommendations on the report are that we note the suite of documents that are associated, but we are at liberty to add comments or even to demand changes if we want to. That's our role as scrutiny. Are there any comments that members would like to make or questions they'd like to ask? I will open it up to the floor before I go to Councillor Stubbs, who I know will have a prepared question or two. If nobody else would like to say anything at this moment, Councillor Stubbs, take it away.
Thank you, Chair. I'd say I promised to keep it brief, but I suspect it'll be a little bit longer. With regard to income realisation of fees and charges, the MTFS assumes 364,000 of additional income from fees and charges in 26-27. Yet the current year shows adverse income variances for car parking, trade waste, bereavement and the temporary pool closure. Given that, what analysis underpins the 26-27 fee uplifts, and what is the scenario if higher prices further depress demand especially given the risk register explicitly flags an increase in fees and charges does not result in higher income as a high risk? That's one.
A couple of things before I pass it over to our version of AI called CT, we call it. The pool closure is, of course, temporary.
Yeah.
So that will come back. And the fees and charges we've raised have been in line with inflation. We haven't put any more on that. But apart from that, I'll pass it over to Craig. Where you go, Craig? Just text on me.
So just address the part first about the income shortfalls. So you're right, there are income shortfalls in some areas. Those shortfalls are not as bad as they have been in previous years if we compared those. We also have some income areas where income is performing over and above the budget. So planning fees, for example, is about £500,000 up this year. So that more than offsets those. In the MTFS, we've got there's a pressure to reduce some of those income areas, such as car parks, and we're working to rebalance some of the budget. So planning next year is highly likely to have a bit more of an income budget, and some of those where we're not achieving the budget levels will be reduced. So that's that part. The 364,000 is based on an average 3.8% rise across the fees and charges. Can you just remind me of what else there was on your question? Sorry.
Risk register quotes says an increase in fees and charges does not result in higher income. Sorry. The risk register specifically as a high risk says increase in fees and charges does not result in high income. How can both be right?
Well, yeah, the risk register to address risk. So there's a risk with every one of our budgets that on the income side of things that we won't achieve. That's just the nature of having an income budget and fluctuations in it. So the risk register feeds into the general fund reserve. That's a wholly risk assessed reserve. So the levels in there take account of anything where we think there may be a shortfall. There's a little formula that gets put in, and a chunky amount of the 2.2 million that we're proposing for the reserve for next year is around income. So if we are short on income, there is something to fall back on there. But the nature of the general fund reserves means that if we did use some of that the following year, we'd have to account for a pressure in the MTFS to top it back up.
Thank you. Moving on to temporary accommodation. Budget pressures include an additional 194,000 for temporary accommodation and a new ring fence grant envelope of 700,000, covering homelessness, prevention of sleeping and domestic abuse. What are the quantified outputs that will reduce temporary accommodation spend, and how will we track the extra grant is achieving what it's meant to be doing?
Thank you again. So temporary accommodation is a problem for every council throughout the country. We've increased our budget by 190 something thousand for next year. That gives us a budget of about £500,000 for temporary accommodation. Our forecast for this year is that we'll spend about £500,000. So the budget that we're providing is sufficient for the current levels. However, you're right. One of our aims is to try and reduce what we spend on temporary accommodation. And we have a temporary accommodation working group that's looking at a number of options. Some of that includes getting in touch with Aspire, and they have certain properties that are called bronze and silver, and they attract different levels of subsidy. So the more that we can have of those from Aspire, the more that expenditure will reduce. We've been lucky enough to maybe get some capital funding from the government. We're in the stages of bidding for it at the moment. But one of the criteria around that is bringing houses and buildings into use for temporary accommodation. So we're going to be working with maybe aspire on that, maybe doing something on our own as well. So we've got a number of different options that hopefully we'll be able to bring back to this committee and to Cabinet in the new financial year.
Building council houses, love it.
Yeah.
Last one on the budget itself, the collection fund. So both the council tax and business rate collection funds are forecast to be in deficit at year end. How confident are we that the business rates reserve can absorb any further shocks in 26-27? And what additional measures are in place to reduce appeal-related volatility before we commit to using one-off reserves to smooth the new 3-year settlement reductions?
So first of all, I'm very confident that there's enough money in the business rates reserve to meet any future volatilities. The balance will be around £2 million, I think, for next year. And then we're looking at being able to increase that the year after by about £500,000. So there's a good chunk of money there. The deficit that we're declaring this year on business rates relates an awful lot to the last financial year. So collection fund accounting's a little odd, I think it's fair to say. So every January, we have to make a declaration, as you've seen in the report there. So this time last year, our declaration was for a pretty huge surplus. I think we declared that a surplus would be about 3 million off the top of my head. But between January and March, there were some significant downwards revaluations. So the difference between what we declared and what we paid back out to the preceptors and to government and to ourselves was about £2 million different than what it actually was. So the deficit that you're seeing, the vast majority of it relates to that very short period of last year. If we look just at this year in isolation, it's much, much closer to being where it should be. Does that make sense?
So I suppose the question then is, if there's been a £2 million reduction in the surplus, was that business rate appeals mostly, or yeah, it was?
Yes, it was.
And they must have been significant buildings to bring it down by that much.
They were, and sometimes when something is successfully appealed, it can be backdated.
Yeah.
So we've just this last month seen a refund of about 300 grand. It's on a property that's got a rateable value of about 100,000. So their backdate is about 4 or 5 years. So we have an appeals provision that's at a suitable level. And when the new business rate system, new business rate cycle starts from 1st of April, that appeals provision will have to be built right back up, which we will do next year to allow for appeals over the next 3-year period.
Okay. Chair, I'm moving on to the strategies. I don't know if anybody else wants to.
Perfectly fine to say at this point, if anybody would like to ask questions on the draft budget itself. Councillor Waring, we'll come to you, and then when we move on to the strategies, we'll come back to you, Councillor.
Sorry to spoil Mike's one. I was going to ask you about the business rates, but that's already been done. But one of the things I noticed when I was going through the report on page 16, where it refers to the estimates of capital expenditure, I just wondered if the dates on, it says the capital programme 26-27, and these are round figures, is 35 million, and then 27-28 is 54 million, but it says the estimated capital expenditure was 35 million, which correlates with that, but it says at the 31st of March 26, and I just wondered if it's a year out on the dates that are on it, and if it isn't, then I just wondered why, because it just seems sensible to me that if you've got capex that you're estimating to spend, then that should correlate with your capital programme. I don't know whether you can see what I'm talking about.
Just repeat us.
Right, okay. So on page 16, Right. It's got figures. Unfortunately, I can't get it back up on my phone so I can read it, but I made some notes of it, and it said the capital programme for 26-27 was in broad figures 35 million.
26-27.
Yeah, right. Okay. But the estimated capital expenditure at the year ending the 31st of March 26 was 35 million. Now, to me, I would have thought that that related to 25-26 rather than 26-27.
Very coincidentally, it's our 25-26 estimated capital expenditure is 35 million, and our programme for 26-27 also amounts to 35 million. So just over 35 million for 26-27 and 35.6 million for 25-26.
Okay, that answers that for me then, because I was sitting there thinking, is this a year out or something?
No, just very similar figures.
Yeah. On page 48, we've got, or around that point, we've got operational boundaries and authorised limits. And for the year 28-29, the operational boundary was 150 million and the authorised limit was 170 million. But when I was going through the figures, I couldn't see any way that we could possibly have borrowing of more than about 50 or 60 million. I just wondered how you actually come to those operational boundaries and authorised limits, because no matter how catastrophic things would be, I couldn't imagine that we could ever be in the circumstance where we would actually need to borrow that amount of money. But I may be wrong. I just wondered if there was a formula that you use or something like that. Thanks.
No, we're not anticipating on borrowing anywhere near that much money, but they're there as a bit of safeguard for if something did go catastrophically wrong, then those limits are okay. We're probably going to be borrowing maybe around 60 million, I would say, over the next couple of years. We've been lucky enough to have the Homes England grant, otherwise that figure would probably be a bit higher. I think it's also important to note that we do have a capital financing requirement without any of the regeneration schemes borrowing. So we've been really lucky to get to this point without having to externally borrow any money. We've had reserves and we've had grants floating around that have enabled us to do that. So our capital financing requirements at the moment is about £20 million. So once the grants have dried up a bit, there's probably 20 million that, as at today, the council will probably have to borrow. And we had the other 80 or 90 million on from the regeneration schemes. I know we've got 20 million, or best part of, from Homes England. Suddenly you're getting up to about 100 million. And then we'll start seeing the receipts come in. So depending on the completion of the schemes and the timelines of that, there's an absolute worst case scenario of us being at around 100 million. That is absolutely not going to happen, I'm sure, but those limits just allow for those very worst case scenarios.
Any further questions, Councillor Waring, or does that conclude your line of inquiry?
That's my final line of inquiry for this section. Thank you.
Phenomenal, fantastic. We'll move on then to the associated strategies, the appendices. So, if Councillor Stubbs, you'd like to have another go?
Yeah, just on capital strategy. So, affordability and risk. So, the strategy projects 16.16 million of MRP and interest costs over the next decade, with the final ratio of financial costs rising to 5.26% in 26-27 to 6.33% in 28-29. What concrete mitigations are in place if capital receipts slip or interest rates stay elevated so that these costs don't crowd out core services?
Okay, so interest rate wise, if interest rates go up, obviously borrowing costs us that bit more money, but the developers of all of our schemes will pay those interest costs. We have an agreement for that. So that safeguards that, I would say.
Mitigation.
Yes.
Also, Annex B shows a very large profile for commercial strategy. It's 76 million, give or take, and reliance on regeneration receipts of 72 million, give or take, alongside periods of regeneration borrowing and other borrowing. Given the authorised and operational borrowing limits, what is the contingency if regeneration receipts underperform or are delayed? Will schemes be paused, rescoped or reprioritised, and how will this be governed?
So the schemes won't be paused. I think those schemes are probably going to come along that bit faster than we'd originally anticipated. C&C are extraordinarily confident that those schemes are going to be successful. We were in Parliament on Tuesday with our Deputy Chief Executive around the Midway car park. So I think given all the publicity that they're giving, certainly that scheme, then I think they'll be wanting to take that off our hands as sooner rather than later. In terms of whether receipts get delayed, then in the meantime between the schemes being completed and the receipts actually coming along, there'll be operational assets, there'll be new assets, there'll be income from rentals on those that will more than cover our borrowing costs.
Okay, are there any other questions from other members? Councillor Grocott.
Yeah, just on the capital programme, Craig, just looking at the leisure section and also looking at facilities management. Could you clarify what comes under, first of all, the facilities management, as it include community centres, different things, which could include Kids Grove Town Hall, things like that? And regarding the leisure section, obviously from 27-28, there is no kind of figures on there. Now, I presume that includes Jubilee 2 and everything else. So just wondering, is any kind of programme or anything we're looking to put in after that? Because obviously we do know there's got to possibly be kind of decoration and anything like that for all kind of premises. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Grocott. So under facilities management, all of our buildings are covered by facilities management, including Jubilee 2. So any normal repairs and that type of thing that keep buildings going, that's covered under the facilities management heading. So where you referred to not really seeing anything under leisure for future years, those normal repairs that we'll have to do to keep the building running are included on the facilities management line. Under the leisure line, those are like real service type improvements rather than just keeping the building going. Does that make sense? Thanks.
Thank you very much for the question and for the answer. Councillor Sweeney, is there anything that you would like to say in response to what you've heard so far?
Thank you, the members for the questions, and thank Mr. Turner for his full answers. He is an officer who is totally on top of his job, and I think that always comes out. Yeah, go on.
Just going back to Jubilee 2, Councillor Grocott, under the leisure line, there's all the decarbonisation projects, the Salix projects that are on that line, which is why that's a considerable amount in those first couple of years. Thanks.
Yeah, I was going to finish off by saying I think in troubled times we're in now, I think to have a council tax rise of 1.99% and a balanced budget, I think it's a tremendous achievement, Mr. South Authority, personally. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Sweeney. There are a lot of things that we've not had time to touch on. We could do line by line scrutiny like the House of Lords, but we'd end up losing our marbles like many in the House of Lords. If there are no further questions tonight, we can all look forward to the budget, which will be discussed with its strategies at full council, and we can move on to the scale of fees and charges. But Councillor Stubbs, you look as though you might want to say something before we close item 4. Yeah, we've not. So we don't think we've referred to the investment management strategy or the commercial strategy at all. But if there's treasury management strategy that you wanted to go on to now, that's fine. Let's hear on that.
Okay. So it's about the borrowing approach and the liability benchmarks. So the balance sheet forecasts and liability benchmarks show a net loans requirement rising to 9.8 million by March 28, with an initial shift to external borrowing next year, and a stated preference for short-term local authority borrowing until it becomes advantageous to lock in long-term debt, which I understand. What is the point there? What's the trigger point? Will it be gilt prices? Will it be the Public Works Loans Board setting a new limit, or will it be analysis from Wallington Close, for example, that tell us to switch from short-term to long-term borrowing? And how will we manage refinancing? Because it's a risk at refund. How will we manage that?
That's why we employ All Inclusive. They are experts on this. They advise more than half of local authorities, the vast majority of which are already in borrowing positions. I think it's important just to note on the treasury management strategy, those borrowing limits just apply to our capital financing requirement. I think now we've had some more updated cash flow information from C&C, I think I'll add a line in under those to reflect the regeneration borrowing amounts as well.
Okay.
So I think that'll just give it a bit more of a complete picture, and that'll go to Cabinet 3rd of February with that information in. So it's just that bit more clear to everybody. Yeah, All Inclusive will, or I'll go to, they monitor these things daily, hourly, and they'll be on the phone to us as soon as they think the opportune moment for switching from short to some long-term borrowing is the right time. I think there will be a mix throughout, certainly through the regeneration projects, of a mixture of short and long term, just to offset the risks of either.
Just one on commercial strategy, Chair. You state the investment decisions will be taken by Cabinet with possible constitutional changes to enable timely decision making alongside meticulous due diligence and rigorous approval process. Can you set out the full decision path from opportunity identification to approval, and the specific Cabinet and officer checkpoints that will be used to halt or reshape the investment if assumptions drift?
Question.
I mean, I'm happy to give that question and get a written answer.
Yeah, I think I can give you a bit of a brief answer if that's all right. So, commercial investments. I think if we rewound 5 or 6 years ago, it was like, yes, let's go for it. Let's invest, borrow loads of money and invest it to get better returns than what we were borrowing at. SITFA have come along after that because a few councils have got themselves into trouble, I think it's fair to say.
Thurrock.
Yeah, there's a few, isn't there? Yeah. So SITFA have really made decisions around commercial investment much harder to do. PWLB won't lend us money for commercial investment either. So although the investment strategy talks about decisions, there are probably not many or any decisions to take around that. The C&C stuff, rather than being a commercial decision, it's around the regeneration of the town. Yeah. And that's absolutely fine, and PWLB will borrow us the money for that. So there's a bit of a difference between regenerating and then building or investing in things for the sake of a return. And I think those days are probably gone, if that's all right.
I just take you back though. So and take all that at face values, but it says investment decisions will be taken by Cabinet. Absolutely. No problem with that. But then with possible constitutional changes to enable timely decision making, which to me doesn't suggest that this is going to be a thought out process. It's going to be really done quite quickly. And what proof is in place that's going to add that meticulous due diligence and rigorous approval processes?
I think the minute we have an idea about commercial investment is probably this committee would be really, really important, wouldn't it, in terms of suggesting what those processes are. I certainly wouldn't allow it to be a quick back decision by any stretch of the imagination.
Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Stubbs. The Constitution, of course, is a matter for full council, and the administration has made clear through this strategy that it may be necessary to make changes. I'm sure that, like me, all members in the room will be reading cover to cover the part F of our Constitution that is up for revision at the next full council opportunity. If you do have any further questions, of course, happy to make space for more detailed scrutiny of that in the future. Probably, those of us that are still on this committee after May's elections, that is the thing that we could ask for more detailed scrutiny about. Would be how is that particular element of that strategy going to be handled? If there are no further questions on the various things in front of us, the draft recommendations are that we should note all of those things and move on. And if we're happy to do so, I will close item 4. We'll move on then to item 5. We touched on fees and charges briefly in the last discussion, but this is the scale of fees and charges for 2026-2027 that was agreed by Cabinet at its most recent meeting. Councillor Sweeney, would you like to introduce the item?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, Cabinet is asked annually to consider proposals of the fees and charges to be applied during the following financial year. It is proposed that the new fees and charges set out in Appendix 1 should take effect from the 1st of April 2026 and remain in force until 31st of March 2027. The Council has an approved charging policy which is followed when fees and charges are proposed, and agreed this sets out the criteria that should be taken into consideration when establishing the amount to be charged. The proposals made vary between minimal decreases, increases and freezes to the fees and charges of the year. When these proposals are applied to the appropriate income budgets, they fall broadly in line with the assumptions of the medium-term financial strategy. You're very welcome.
Thank you, Councillor Sweeney. Are there any questions or comments on this item? Councillor Waring.
Yeah, I don't mean to be facetious, and it was just a couple of things that made me think when I was reading it. And we have a fee for the exhumation of cremated remains, and I just wondered whether that ever actually happens. But on a more sort of likely note, we've got fines for littering and graffiti and those sorts of things. And given that when we go around, we see a lot of graffiti and a lot of littering, I just wondered whether it's common for us to actually get money for littering and graffiti, or whether it's an extremely rare circumstance. Other than that, I thought that the whole schedule seemed pretty sensible, actually. Thank you.
The cremated part, I don't know about that. I certainly know that when we exhume a body, which our officers don't do it. Obviously, there's professional people who do it. We charge a considerable fee for that, and it's not a job I'd want to do. So I think they deserve that. Littering, graffiti, and all these things, they've got to be seen to do it. It's like dog fouling, isn't it? Everybody hates dog fouling, but unless you can see the dog doing it and follow it to the house it lives in, there's not a lot you can do. But I certainly think that the council has an attitude to prosecute whenever we can on these things, because I think the things that one of the reasons I've got a real thing about litter, I can't stand it, and I can't stand vandalism, and I can't stand graffiti. So it's things that I feel very passionately about, and I believe this council, if it gets the opportunity, will take any things it can. And I I think residents want us to do that, and I think certainly all members do. I say I can't be doing with litter. It's like vandalism. No, it comes to that, Craig.
Just what Councillor said, we do have litter enforcement. It heavily depends on somebody littering in front of the litter enforcement officer, which if we rewound a few years ago, people did, but I think they've become a bit wise to him. So the income's dropped off that, to be fair.
I was just wondering if we'd got any statistics on it. The exhumation thing, there is a fee for exhumation of cremated remains, and I just thought it seemed unlikely that anybody would actually do that, but I may be completely wrong.
I don't think it's perhaps as unlikely as you think, because suppose your partner's buried here, or his cremated remains are here, and you move down south somewhere, so you might want to. You could see that happening. Have we got figures for that at all, Craig, or not?
Not on me.
No. Well, we caught you out. Oh dear.
It's one of
Cost to get a body out.
I've not brought with me.
They will exist, though, won't
Yeah, they will. I'll find out for you, Councillor.
I know they're there. That was why I asked the question, because I saw it on the schedule and I was just surprised to see it there. That was what it was.
Yeah, there's a fee on the schedule. We'll find out how many, if any, are undertaken. Thanks.
We'll look forward to receiving that figure. Are there any other questions, Councillor Stubbs?
Dear, how do you follow that? On the scale of justification of fee increases, so several services show above inflation increases. For example, bulky waste collection is rising from £52 to £62 for 1 to 3 items, and significant increases across parking, cemetery services and garden waste. Can officers explain the evidence base and the cost recovery modelling used to justify these increases, and what assessment has been made of the impact on low-income residents?
Okay, so on average, our fees have gone up by 3.8%. So some will have gone up by slightly more, some will have gone up by slightly less, or might well have been frozen. I think when we come back to the impact on our residents, lots and lots of the fees and charges are choices. So you have the choice of whether you want your garden waste collected, for example, or you have the choice of digging up your cremated remains, a virality or whatever. So fees and charges tend to be choices, and by increasing those, we keep council tax low. So those who are on lower incomes, in a perfect world, we'd give everything for free, wouldn't we? But we're not in a perfect world. We've got our own inflationary costs to manage. But by increasing these by only an inflationary amount, we're able to keep council tax for 95% of our residents at a 10 pence per week increase, 1.99% per year. So that's how it feeds in.
Yeah, I think in general I agree with that, but just picking one of the ones that I mentioned, it's certainly not a choice. Cemetery services isn't a choice. It happens. You're not going to bury them in the back garden because that's against the law. So, I mean, things like that are not a choice. I think my concern is I agree that there's got to be a balance between council tax and other income. I understand that. But some of the items I've mentioned, so, for example, the parking, that's significantly above the 3.9% average on some car parks, most of the car parks. That is going to affect anybody on a low income wanting to come into the town centre. They have a choice then. They do have a choice. Do they stop shopping in Newcastle because they can't afford to park in Newcastle? So, I mean, I accept your answer. I'll move on to another one. So, and it's probably the same thing, but some charges have increased sharply, while others remain frozen or have reduced significantly. And the one that stuck out was the dangerous wild animal licence. It's like half in cost. What is the strategic rationale for these variations? How do we choose which one goes up by more than inflation and which ones go below. Now, some will be set by national bodies, I understand that. But what's the council's policy objective? And what is it driven by financial sustainability, or is it driven by regulatory costs?
Thank you. So our charging policy suggests that we should try and recover all costs of providing services. So as an example, parking, those costs help to address the costs that those charges help to address the costs that we incur in providing car parks, maintenance car parks, the building of car parks. Some of those charges that you've referred to, it looks like there's an overinflationary rise. It might well be due to some roundings. So increasing £1 parking fee by 10 pence looks like a 10% rise, doesn't it? But well, it is 10% rise. Yeah, there's nothing. But we can't put it up by 3.8% because we can't charge somebody £1 and 4 pence for parking. So I think on the issue of parking, we've frozen car parking for an awful long time. And there are some small increases this year, it's fair to say. I think in terms of car parking, our fees are pretty minimal compared to other areas within the Midlands. I've been to Birmingham today, to outside the Children's Hospital, where you have no choice really, and I've paid £13 for 3 hours. So I know Birmingham's a big city. Yeah.
You have to be. I agree with the point. I think if you take Birmingham out of the conversation, Shrewsbury or relevant towns that we mirror, it's about the offer, and I worry by putting the costs up that the offer isn't going to improve, and then it gives the residents and people from outside the area the decision, well, are they willing to pay that 10% increase? Yes, and I know it's 10p, but we're all politicians and we've all wrote leaflets about putting things up by 3 or 5 or whatever. I put stuff up by £5 in the council tax, and it was like I'd set the building on fire. Because percentage-wise, I think it was 13% or something like that. It'd gone up by, but it was a £5. So I understand that the challenge, but people from further away won't be reading what me and you are talking about today. They're just going to see that prices are going up by 10% in the car parks. And I understand why we're doing it, but I suppose I'm just flagging it as it's a concern. We need to improve the offer to allow us to put up the prices and things like that.
Yeah, and with regards to the offer, that should be vastly improving, shouldn't it, over the next 12, 18, 24 months with all the regeneration projects. Newcastle will be a town to come to, and a town that we should all be very proud of, and I'll certainly be proud to work for, hopefully still.
Yeah, thank you. That's echoing to a certain extent what Craig says. I think the capital century work that's going on at the moment in conjunction with the cells is a lot more people in the town. More people in the town, it's more footfall in the town, and more footfall in the town, it's businesses opening and people spending money in the town. That's one thing. Secondly, I think I haven't got the figures this time. I did it last year. I think the Midway car park in 15 years went up 10 pence. So I think if we're here in a year's time and we got 10% increase, 10 pence increase on you'd be very right to stand up and say, well, hang on, you used this excuse last year. It was you can't do it 3.4% or whatever it is. So why are you doing it this year? Do you know what I mean? I think there could well be next year people looking and think, well, we did that last year. We can't do it this year because it'd be wrong. It'd be 10% last year, so perhaps it should be 5% next year. Do you understand what I mean? I think you can't keep doing it, but if we're here next year, you can ask the same question. And I think it's a valid question to ask.
Thank you very much, Councillor Sweeney. So we heard on car parking, it's 10 pence this year. Over the lifetime of the current municipal cycle, the rise is smaller than inflation. And over the very long term, given that we've invested in upgrading that offer, this council has delivered value for money on car parking. The answer that we heard on cemetery costs is that this is a service that needs to recover the cost of providing those services. Is anybody here wanting to propose that we raise council taxes in order to freeze our fees and charges, or are we happy with what's been proposed? I suppose that's the ultimate question, isn't it? Whether you think that this should be funded through general taxation. Councillor Stubbs, would you like to put another 13%?
It's a really easy response, Mark, and you should know better than that. If you guys don't want to set the budget, we're more than happy to take over and do it. So there you go.
I will take that. So if Councillor Stubbs was running the council, taxes would go up, and I'll say the same when we come to our
I also think when I look through this, which I haven't, I can't remember who it was now, the cemetery costs don't pay for themselves at the moment, do they? Or do they? It's one of the pressures, isn't it? Cremation costs are pressure, isn't it? Yeah. No, which is what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Okay. Councillor Parker, you indicated you'd like to speak.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, as the panel says, that we have froze the parking for a number of years. Unfortunately, such is life, we can't maintain that forever. My personal opinion is that a 10p increase over the first 2 hours, it's not going to really be noticeable. People will keep coming into the town, like Councillor Sweeney says. Businesses are opening into the town, so those people do have to park. I have an example right here now. So Silverdale Road, first hour is £1.20 to increase to £1.30, which is the 10p increase. The same for 2 hours. 3 hours is also 10p. Then for somebody who wishes to park in the town for 6 hours is an increase of 20p. So it is in their best interest, in my opinion, to look at a monthly ticket. So for example is, if somebody parks hour to hour, they will be spending £88.83 per month. Per quarter is £266.50. A monthly ticket, £67.50, and a quarterly ticket will be £178.60, which will save that individual £88 a month. So there's more incentive than, I understand Councillor Stubbs' argument, but if people were to look at the bigger picture and get the quarterly ticket, the monthly ticket, it gives them saving. So everyone's a winner. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Parker. Would Councillor Sweeney or our officer care to respond to that, or are you happy for it to sit on the record?
No, I'm happy to sit on that. I think our parking fees are very good, really. I think obviously we'd like it to be free. We'd like everything to be free. Like me shopping at Tesco to be free, but it's not going to happen. But I think we're very competitive. And I say that I think it's something like 10p in 13 or 14 years the Midway went up. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that response, Councillor Sweeney. Are there any other questions or comments on the scale of fees and charges? Councillor Grocott.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It just comes on the obviously sporting side, actually, just something that Craig may be able to point out. Obviously, we're looking up at Cheston to have our own pitches and all that, and obviously Councillor Tagg was up with me on Saturday up there, which is very good. What I've noticed on here is there are small increases where at the moment a lot of people are struggling. I think it would have been great if we could have held them or done something else. In all fairness, that's not just football, that's rugby as well, because obviously it's keeping people healthy and that kind of stuff, so that's something I'd like to see. But what I would also say as well, Wayne to Craig on obviously the committee here, when I was with obviously Councillor Tagg, the leader, on Saturday, one of the pitches is Crackley Field, which once again was unfortunately had bikes all over it again. So obviously, they've done a lot of repairs themselves as well as, so obviously that's more obviously cost to them. Where I'm looking more at, to be honest with you, is coming back to Woolston Marsh Pavilion, and this is based on an experience. Okay, is there kind of two scales? And the reason I'm asking this, mainly to Craig anyway, is that obviously we played there about 4 to 5 weeks ago, maybe a bit longer, And actually in the car behind me was actually Councillor John Tagg watching the game, which is very good. But at that game, we were playing Portel, and they didn't actually use the pavilion. We actually got changed by the road. So is the 2-1s, or is the pavilion actually supplied as a cost, or is there a different costing as well? Thank you.
Yeah, no. Do you know, Greg?
I don't know, but I can find out for you, Councillor Greycup. So you want to know if there's a fee for the pavilion and the pitch, and a fee for just the pitch?
I mean, yes, that is. If they aren't doing that, should there be a difference? I mean, to be honest, these days, I think you should have a change in facility anyway. That should be a mandatory one, but it's just something to be worth knowing. Okay, thank you. It was the bottom marsh pitch. Yeah, it's the bottom. You got the top one where Maybank play and Porto play on the bottom one. Obviously, the Woolston, yeah.
Okay, for the minutes then, we'll ask that a response is provided in writing from our officers. Any more on the scale of fees and charges? Councillor Waring.
I just wanted to say overall, it is regrettable when you have to increase the costs of certain things, but ultimately, you've got to bear in mind that it isn't necessarily right for everybody to have to bear the cost of things as they increase. You know, people around in the borough who don't necessarily use all these facilities, in some cases who never use these facilities, and so you can't always expect them to pick up the tab when the increases arise. So it is a matter of finding a balance. So I think it's fair from what I've seen anyway. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Waring. Councillor Sweeney, do you have anything to say by way of winding up?
No, I think Councillor Waring makes a very fair point there. Thank you. Got nothing else.
Okay, in that case, that concludes discussion on item number 5. Item number 6 is the work programme. Again, we're approaching the end of the municipal cycle. There is one remaining meeting for us to hold prior to the May elections, and at that meeting we will consider the quarterly finance and performance report for quarter 3, and we'll have updates on the Town Deal and Future High Street Fund and the commercial strategy. In terms of the Town Deal and Future High Street Fund, you may have seen, members, that we were expecting to have an update at this committee, but it's only been a few weeks since our last meeting. If any member would like to ask for an update, I'm sure that our officer, Mr. McKennedy, would like to receive an email from us. So in the interim, having not had the opportunity of considering that report at this meeting, because it looks substantially very similar to the one we received last time, we will consider that at our next meeting, and that is, I think, the last item of business that we were expecting to consider. Item 7 is public question time. I've been made aware of no public questions. Item 8 is urgent business. I'm not aware of any of those, any such items. Item 9, date of the next meeting, as said, March, should be Thursday, the 26th of March. Items 10 and 11 relate to the exclusion resolution and the trade refuse scale of fees and charges. Would any member want to discuss the scale of fees and charges on the confidential appendix? Do you want to do that? Because if not, we won't have to move the exclusion resolution, and we won't move item 11 either. So if neither of those items are moved, that's the end of the meeting. Thank you very much.
You two are right.